Aaron Hernandez was born in Bristol, Connecticut, a town built on industry and tough expectations. He was the son of Dennis and Terry Hernandez, the younger of two boys. His father, Dennis, was a local football legend known as the King. He was a powerful, imposing figure who ruled his home with an iron fist. He pushed his sons, DJ and Aaron, relentlessly toward athletic greatness. The pressure was immense, a constant weight on their young shoulders. Love and discipline were often intertwined, sometimes violently. In the Hernandez household, football was not just a game. It was the only path forward, the only way to earn their father's approval. This rigid, demanding environment shaped Aaron from his earliest days, forging both his talent and his turmoil. The world Aaron knew was shattered in January 2006. His father, Dennis, went into the hospital for a routine hernia surgery. He was supposed to be home in a day or two, but complications from the procedure led to a fatal infection. At just 49 years old, the patriarch of the Hernandez family was gone. For 16-year-old Aaron, the loss was catastrophic. The man who had been his compass, his enforcer, and his biggest motivator had vanished. Without his father's strict guidance, Aaron seemed to drift. Friends and family noticed a dramatic shift in his personality. The once focused athlete became more rebellious, angry, and secretive, acting out in ways that hinted at a deep, unaddressed pain that was festering just beneath the surface. This sudden void in his life became a breeding ground for darker influences. Aaron started spending time with a different crowd, people from the rougher side of Bristol who lived by a different code. He was searching for something, perhaps a sense of belonging or a new form of authority to follow. His mother, Terry, was overwhelmed by her own grief and struggled to manage her increasingly defiant son. The structure that had defined Aaron's existence had crumbled, and in its place, a chaotic and dangerous freedom took root. The loss of his father wasn't just a sad chapter in his life, it was the event that knocked his world off its axis, sending him down a path from which he would never truly recover. The seeds of his future were sown in this period of grief and confusion. The anger, the paranoia, and the inability to trust others began to grow. Some reports that emerged years later suggested even deeper traumas from his childhood, including sexual abuse, which may have been compounded by his father's death. He was a boy wrestling with demons he couldn't name, in a world that only cared about his performance on the football field. The foundation of his life had been built on the shaky ground of fear and pressure. When his father died, that foundation gave way completely, leaving a young man with immense talent and a gaping wound in his soul, a wound that would continue to bleed for the rest of his short, tragic life. On the football field, Aaron Hernandez was a force of nature. At Bristol Central High School, he was more than just a star. He was a phenomenon. His size, speed, and raw athleticism made him virtually unstoppable. He dominated every game, a man among boys, catching passes and leaving defenders in his wake. Scouts from the top college programs in the country flocked to Connecticut to witness the spectacle. He was a hometown hero, the kid destined for greatness, the one who would put Bristol on the map. His on-field prowess was a dazzling display that masked the growing turmoil within. For every touchdown he scored, there was a shadow lengthening, a part of him that was pulling away from the bright lights and into the dark. He chose to play for the University of Florida, a football powerhouse coached by the legendary Urban Meyer. It was a perfect fit, or so it seemed. In Gainesville, his talent exploded onto the national stage. Alongside quarterback Tim Tebow, he became a key weapon for the Florida Gators. The team was a juggernaut, and Hernandez was at the heart of their success. In 2009, he helped lead the Gators to a BCS national championship victory. That same year, he won the John Mackey Award, an honor given to the nation's most outstanding tight end. He was on top of the world, an All-American with a future so bright it was blinding. The fame, the accolades, the roar of the crowd, it was everything his father had ever wanted for him. But even in the midst of glory, the red flags were there, waving for anyone who cared to look. There were whispers of failed drug tests, bar fights, and a general air of defiance. He was involved in a nightclub incident where he allegedly ruptured a bouncer's eardrum. He was also questioned by police in connection with a shooting, though he was never charged. These were not the actions of a typical college athlete. They were warning signs, glimpses of the volatility and violence simmering just below his superstar persona. The coaching staff and the university, perhaps blinded by his on-field brilliance, seemed to handle these issues internally, allowing the problems to fester rather than be addressed head-on. The pattern was clear: incredible talent, followed by troubling behavior. Aaron was living a double life. One was the celebrated football star, the charismatic athlete who could charm anyone. The other was a troubled young man drawn to danger, paranoia, and a street code that had no place in the world he was trying to inhabit. He was a puzzle of contradictions, a celebrated hero who seemed to be courting disaster. As he prepared to leave college for the NFL, scouts noted his character concerns. These concerns would cause his draft stock to fall, a clear signal from the league that his off-field risks were just as apparent as his on-field gifts. He was a high-risk, high-reward prospect, a gamble that one team would be willing to take. Despite the character concerns that saw him slide in the 2010 NFL Draft, the New England Patriots took a chance on Aaron Hernandez. They selected him in the 4th round, a steal for a player of his caliber. Under the famously strict leadership of coach Bill Belichick, many believed the Patriot way, a culture of discipline, accountability, and team-first mentality, would be the perfect environment to keep Aaron in line. It seemed to work at first. Paired with fellow rookie tight end Rob Gronkowski, Hernandez formed one of a half of the most dynamic and unstoppable offensive duos the league had ever seen. Their contrasting styles, Gronkowski's brute force and Hernandez's fluid athleticism, created nightmares for opposing defenses and helped redefine the tight end position in modern football. Hernandez quickly became a star in the NFL. He was a versatile offensive weapon, capable of lining up anywhere on the field and creating mismatches. In his 2nd season, he helped lead the Patriots to Super Bowl 46, catching a touchdown pass in a hard-fought loss against the New York Giants. His performance on the biggest stage cemented his status as one of the league's elite players. The Patriots organization, pleased with his production and seemingly improved behavior, decided to reward him. In August 2012, just before the start of his 3rd season, they signed him to a massive 5-year, $40 million contract extension, which included a $12.5 million signing bonus, the largest ever given to a tight end at the time. This contract was more than just money. It was a symbol of trust, and a declaration that he was a cornerstone of the franchise. At the press conference, a smiling Hernandez spoke of his desire to be a role model in his community and to live up to the faith the team had shown him. He donated $50,000 to a charity founded by the team's owner, Robert Kraft, who saw him as a son. For a moment it looked like the fairy tale was complete. The troubled kid from Bristol had overcome his demons, embraced the structure of the NFL, and secured his future. He had a beautiful fiancée, Cheyenne Jenkins, and a baby daughter on the way. He had it all. But the ticking clock of his past was growing louder. While he was presenting one face to the public and the Patriots, he was maintaining his ties to the dangerous world he came from. He kept his old friends from Bristol close, men with criminal records and a penchant for violence. The paranoia that had taken root years earlier was now amplified by his fame and wealth. He felt he was a constant target, that people were always trying to use him or disrespect him. He carried a gun for protection, a clear violation of NFL rules, and a sign that he was still living by the law of the street, not the law of the land. The massive contract meant to secure his future only gave him more resources to fund his dark parallel life. The carefully constructed world of Aaron Hernandez came crashing down on June 17, 2013. On that day, the body of Odin Lloyd, a 27-year-old semi-professional football player, was discovered in an industrial park less than a mile from Hernandez's mansion in North Attleboro, Massachusetts. Lloyd had been shot multiple times. The investigation quickly zeroed in on the Patriots star. Lloyd was dating the sister of Hernandez's fiancée, Cheyenne Jenkins, making him a familiar face in Aaron's inner circle. The night before his body was found, Lloyd had been seen getting into a car with Hernandez and 2 of his associates from Bristol, Carlos Ortiz and Ernest Wallace. This was the last time anyone would see Odin Lloyd alive. The evidence against Hernandez mounted with terrifying speed. Investigators pieced together a damning timeline using cell phone records, text messages, and surveillance footage. Security cameras from Hernandez's own home, which he had tried to destroy, showed him arriving back at his house just minutes after the estimated time of Lloyd's murder. The footage captured him holding what appeared to be a Glock pistol, the same type of weapon used in the killing. A rental car, a silver Nissan Altima that Hernandez had leased, was linked to the crime scene through tire tracks and a discarded piece of bubble gum containing his DNA. The motive, prosecutors argued, was trivial and rooted in paranoia. Hernandez felt Lloyd knew too much about his other secrets and could no longer be trusted. On the morning of June 26, 2013, 9 days after Lloyd's body was found, television cameras swarmed Hernandez's sprawling mansion. Police led the NFL star out of his home in handcuffs, his white t-shirt stretched tight over his muscular frame. He was charged with first-degree murder. The images were shocking, almost surreal. This was not just some troubled athlete. This was one of the brightest stars in America's most popular sport, being arrested for a brutal execution-style killing. The New England Patriots, a franchise that prided itself on avoiding distractions, acted swiftly. Within 2 hours of his arrest, the team announced they had released him, severing all ties. His jerseys were pulled from shelves and his name was scrubbed from the team's history. The trial was a media circus. It painted a grim picture of a man living a life of secrets, violence, and paranoia. The prosecution methodically laid out its case, presenting a mountain of circumstantial evidence that, when woven together, created an undeniable narrative of guilt. They showed the jury the final haunting text messages Lloyd sent to his sister, sensing something was wrong. They called Cheyenne Jenkins to the stand, who tearfully admitted to removing a box from the house at Aaron's request, a box prosecutors believed contained the murder weapon. On April 15, 2015, after a lengthy trial, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The conviction carried a mandatory sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. The fall was complete. While Aaron Hernandez sat in a Massachusetts prison cell, serving a life sentence for the murder of Odin Lloyd, another dark chapter from his past was about to be revealed. Boston prosecutors had been quietly building a case against him for a crime that had occurred nearly a year before Lloyd's death. On July 16, 2012, two men, Daniel Deabreu and Safiro Furtado, were killed in a drive-by shooting in Boston's South End. The case had gone cold, a tragic mystery with few leads, but investigators had a witness, a man named Alexander Bradley, who claimed he was with Hernandez that night and saw everything. Bradley, once a close friend of Hernandez, had his own story of violence, alleging that Hernandez had shot him in the face months later in Florida to silence him. Prosecutors indicted Hernandez for the 2012 double homicide, arguing that the motive was, once again, rooted in a perceived slight. They claimed that earlier in the evening at a Boston nightclub, Daniel Deabreu had accidentally bumped into Hernandez, spilling his drink. This minor incident, prosecutors said, was enough to send the volatile NFL star into a rage. According to the prosecution's theory, Hernandez waited for Deabreu and his friends to leave the club, followed their car, and then pulled up alongside them at a red light. From the driver's seat of his SUV, he allegedly leaned over and fired a .38 caliber revolver into their vehicle, killing Deabreu and Furtado and wounding another passenger. The second murder trial began in early 2017. This time the prosecution's case was far weaker. Unlike the Odin Lloyd case, there was no mountain of surveillance footage or DNA evidence directly linking Hernandez to the crime scene. Their entire case rested almost exclusively on the testimony of their star witness, Alexander Bradley. Bradley was a convicted drug dealer with a long criminal history who had been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony. On the stand, Hernandez's defense team, led by the charismatic Jose Baez, tore Bradley apart. They painted him as a liar, a violent criminal who was motivated by revenge and a desire to get out of his own legal troubles. Baez argued that it was Bradley, not Hernandez, who was the shooter. He presented an alternate theory that the shooting was the result of a drug deal gone wrong, a deal orchestrated by Bradley himself. The defense also introduced the idea that Hernandez's friendship with Bradley was complicated, hinting at a deeper, more intimate connection that had soured. After weeks of testimony, the jury was left with a case built on reasonable doubt. On April 14, 2017, they returned their verdict. Aaron Hernandez was found not guilty of the double murder. He was acquitted on almost all charges, though convicted of a single count of illegal firearm possession. He wept openly in the courtroom, a rare display of emotion. For a fleeting moment, it seemed like he had beaten the system. Just 5 days after his stunning acquittal in the Boston double murder trial, the final shocking chapter of Aaron Hernandez's life unfolded. On the morning of April 19, 2017, guards at the Souza Baranowski Correctional Center, a maximum security prison in Massachusetts, made a grim discovery. The 27-year-old former football star was found dead in his single-occupancy cell. He had hanged himself using a bedsheet that he had tied to the window bars. He had also jammed cardboard into the door tracks to prevent guards from entering quickly. The scene was honestly bizarre and meticulously planned. It was a calculated final act from a man whose life had been defined by chaos. The details that emerged from the death scene were haunting and cryptic. Hernandez had written John 3:16 on his forehead in ink, a reference to a famous Bible verse about salvation and eternal life. He had also scrawled the verse on the wall of his cell. Open on a table was a Bible, turned to that very passage. He had left behind 3 handwritten notes, one for his fiancée Cheyenne Jenkins, one for his young daughter Aviel, and one for his lawyer Jose Baez. The contents of the notes spoke of love, of entering a timeless realm, and of his belief that his death would ultimately provide for his family. It was a tragic and perplexing end to a life that had once held so much promise. His death was officially ruled a suicide, but the timing and circumstances immediately sparked speculation. Why would he kill himself just days after being acquitted of a double murder? He was appealing his conviction for the Odin Lloyd murder, and his legal team felt they had a strong chance of success. Some whispered of foul play, while others wondered if the acquittal had brought not relief, but a final, crushing realization of the life he had lost. His lawyer, Jose Baez, publicly stated that Hernandez was optimistic, and that there was no way he would have taken his own life. The family requested an independent autopsy, searching for answers that might never come. In a strange legal twist, Hernandez's suicide initially had a profound legal consequence. Under a little-known and archaic Massachusetts legal doctrine called abatement ab initio, a conviction is vacated if the defendant dies before all avenues of appeal have been exhausted. This meant that, for a time, Aaron Hernandez was legally an innocent man. The move would have potentially allowed his estate to sue the New England Patriots for the money still owed on his contract. However, in 2019, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court overturned this precedent and reinstated his murder conviction, ensuring that he would be remembered in the eyes of the law as what the jury found him to be: a murderer. After his death, Aaron Hernandez's brain was donated to science at the request of his family. It was sent to Boston University's CTE Center, a leading institution for the study of a degenerative brain disease called chronic traumatic encephalopathy. CTE is caused by repeated head trauma, the kind of impacts common in contact sports like football. The disease is associated with a range of devastating symptoms, including memory loss, confusion, impaired judgment, aggression, impulse control problems, depression, and paranoia. It can only be diagnosed posthumously by examining brain tissue. When the researchers led by Dr. Ann McKee completed their analysis, the findings were, well, shocking. Dr. McKee revealed that Aaron Hernandez had stage 3 CTE, on a scale of 4. It was the most severe case of the disease they had ever seen in a brain of someone his age. He was only 27. The damage was widespread, affecting parts of the brain critical for decision-making, emotional regulation, and memory. There were large holes in the central parts of his brain, and a significant buildup of tau protein, the telltale marker of the disease. The diagnosis provided a stunning and deeply troubling new context for his life and crimes. It did not excuse his actions, but it offered a potential biological explanation for his increasingly erratic, paranoid, and violent behavior. The CTE diagnosis sent shockwaves through the sports world, particularly the NFL. It forced a renewed and urgent conversation about the long-term dangers of football. If a young star like Hernandez could have such advanced brain disease, what did that mean for the thousands of other players, past and present? The findings raised uncomfortable questions. Was the NFL doing enough to protect its players? Could the league itself be held partially responsible for creating the conditions that led to Hernandez's violent downfall? The link between the brutal, celebrated violence on the field and the tragic, real-world violence off it had never been so starkly illustrated. The discovery shifted the narrative around Aaron Hernandez. He was no longer just a monster or a cold-blooded killer. He was also, in a sense, a victim of a violent game, of a culture that celebrated big hits, and of a disease that silently ravaged his mind. This did not absolve him of responsibility for the lives he destroyed, but it complicated the story immensely. It suggested that the man who pulled the trigger may not have been in complete control of his own mind. The damage inside his skull became a crucial piece of the puzzle. a key to understanding how a celebrated all-American athlete could become a convicted murderer. It was a chilling testament to the hidden costs of the game he loved. The tragic and sensational story of Aaron Hernandez was tailor-made for the modern era of true crime media. His life contained all the elements of a gripping drama: fame, fortune, violence, secrets, and a spectacular fall from grace. It was inevitable that his story would be dissected and retold across various platforms, each attempting to answer the unanswerable question, how did this happen? Among the most prominent of these was the 2020 Netflix documentary series, Killer Inside the Mind of Aaron Hernandez. The series captivated a global audience, weaving together courtroom footage, news reports, and intimate interviews with those who knew him. The Netflix documentary delved deep into the complexities of Hernandez's life, exploring the interlocking factors that may have contributed to his downfall. It meticulously examined the impact of his father's death, his tumultuous relationship with his mother, and his exposure to violence from a young age. A significant portion of the series was devoted to his CTE diagnosis, using expert testimony to explain how the disease could have warped his personality and judgment. The documentary also brought his rumored bisexuality to the forefront, speculating that the immense pressure of hiding his identity within the hyper-masculine culture of professional football may have created an unbearable internal conflict, fueling his anger and paranoia. The series and other media portrayals like the Boston Globe's Gladiator podcast and a subsequent FX television series forced a public conversation about sensitive and often taboo subjects. The discussion around Hernandez's sexuality was particularly polarizing. Some saw it as a crucial piece of his psychological puzzle, a source of profound inner turmoil. Others viewed it as an exploitative and unsubstantiated invasion of privacy, irrelevant to the crimes he committed. These portrayals highlighted the media's struggle to balance a nuanced exploration of a complex figure with the sensationalism that drives viewership. The story became a cultural touchstone for debates on mental health, masculinity, and the pressures of fame. Ultimately, these media retellings cemented Aaron Hernandez's place in popular culture as a modern-day cautionary tale. They transformed him from a simple villain into a complex, tragic figure whose story served as a lens through which society could examine its own values. The fascination with his life and death was not just about the gruesome details of his crimes. It was about the unsettling questions his story raised about the institutions we celebrate, like the NFL, and the hidden struggles of those we place on pedestals. The screen became a mirror, reflecting a society trying to make sense of a tragedy that implicated not just one man, but the very culture that created him. The story of Aaron Hernandez is a labyrinth of pain, a tragedy with no single simple explanation. His legacy is not that of a football star, but of a broken man whose life serves as a stark warning. One of the most profound lessons is about the devastating and long-lasting impact of unresolved trauma. The sudden death of his domineering father left a void that was filled with anger, confusion, and a desperate search for identity. This early trauma, possibly compounded by other hidden abuses, was never addressed. Instead, it was papered over by athletic success. His story is a powerful testament to the fact that fame and fortune cannot heal deep psychological wounds. They can only provide a more elaborate stage for their destructive consequences. His life and death also cast a long, dark shadow over the sport of football. The post-mortem discovery of severe CTE in his brain forever linked his violent acts to the violent nature of the game itself. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth: the very qualities that made him a celebrated gladiator on the field, aggression, fearlessness, and a disregard for physical consequence, may have been intertwined with the disease that eroded his ability to function as a human being off the field. His case became a focal point in the ongoing debate about player safety, forcing leagues, parents, and fans to weigh the entertainment value of the sport against the profound and irreversible damage it can inflict upon its participants. Furthermore, the narrative surrounding Hernandez compels a difficult conversation about mental health, masculinity, and identity. The pressure to conform to a rigid, hyper-masculine ideal within the world of professional sports is immense. The possibility that Hernandez was struggling with his sexuality in secret adds another layer of complexity to his psychological state. The fear of being ostracized and the stress of living a double life could have created an internal pressure cooker of shame and rage. His story challenges us to create environments, especially in sports, where individuals feel safe enough to be their authentic selves, and to seek help for their struggles without fear of judgment or rejection. In the end, the legacy of Aaron Hernandez is one of profound loss. There is the loss of Odin Lloyd, Daniel De Abreu, and Safiro Furtado, men whose lives were violently cut short. There is the loss felt by their families who must live forever with the consequences of his actions. There is the loss for his own family, particularly his young daughter, who will grow up in the shadow of her father's infamy. And there is the loss of Aaron Hernandez himself, a young man blessed with extraordinary gifts who became consumed by his demons. His story teaches us that violence is a contagion, and that unaddressed pain, whether physical or emotional, can ultimately destroy not only one life, but many.